Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning and discover that every opinion you hold, every belief you've defended, every value you've lived by, none of it originated from you. Not really. The political stance you argue so passionately, downloaded from your parents, your friends, your favorite influencer, the brand you're loyal to, the lifestyle you aspire toward, the dreams you chase, carefully planted by algorithms that studied your every click, your every pause, your every moment of digital vulnerability. Even the God you worship or reject, the philosophy you claim as your own, what if these two were merely inherited, absorbed, adopted, without the slightest interrogation? What if you've been living someone else's life, thinking someone else's thoughts, while believing with absolute conviction that you were free? This video is an invitation to awaken. We will explore the dangers of ignorance and idolatry and how both lead to the slow erosion of one of the most powerful human capacities, critical thinking. By the end, you will not only understand the mechanisms that silence independent thought, but also discover ways to revive your inner strength to resist them. And stay with me until the last part, because the final revelation we will uncover is the most powerful of all, one that could transform the way you perceive truth, freedom, and even your own identity. Before we dive deeper, take a moment to support this journey. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share your reflections in the comments. This is more than just another video. It is a movement of people seeking clarity in a time of noise. People who dare to question when others simply follow. And I promise you, what you are about to hear can challenge your assumptions, shake your comfort zones, and perhaps even change the way you live your life. Let us begin. This is not a comfortable thought. It crawls beneath your skin, doesn't it? Because deep down, in that quiet space you rarely visit, you've already sensed the truth. You've felt the strange hollowness that comes from defending positions you can't quite explain. You've experienced that peculiar discomfort when someone asks, why? And you realize you don't actually know. You just believe. You've watched yourself scroll endlessly, consuming opinion after opinion, feeling informed while remaining fundamentally unchanged, fundamentally unquestioned, fundamentally asleep. But here's the paradox that should terrify you. We live in an age of unprecedented access to information, yet we may be the most intellectually enslaved generation in human history. Our ancestors had limited knowledge, but questioned relentlessly. We have infinite knowledge, but question barely at all. They were starved for information. We are drowning in it. Yet somehow, in this ocean of data, we've lost the ability to swim. We've forgotten how to think. Consider the strangeness of this moment. You can access the sum of human knowledge with a few taps on a screen. Every philosophical treatise, every scientific discovery, every historical account, it's all there, waiting. Yet what do we do with this godlike power? We use it to confirm what we already believe. We weaponize information to win arguments, not to discover truth. We treat knowledge like a commodity to be consumed, not a fire to be kindled within us. We've become curators of opinions rather than seekers of understanding. And in this landscape of endless choice, we've created new gods to bow before. Not the stone idols of ancient times, but something far more insidious. The idol of consensus, the idol of popularity, the idol of comfort. We worship at the altar of whatever makes us feel safe, validated, part of something larger than ourselves. We surrender our minds to influencers who project confidence, to movements that promise belonging, to narratives that require no effort beyond acceptance and repetition. When was the last time you changed your mind about something important? Not a trivial preference, but a foundational belief? When was the last time you encountered an idea that genuinely threatened your worldview and, instead of dismissing it, sat with the discomfort until you'd honestly grappled with its implications? For most of us, the answer is troubling. We've calcified. We've chosen certainty over truth, comfort over growth, tribe over thought. This is how critical thinking dies, not through violent suppression, but through voluntary surrender. We hand over the keys to our minds because thinking is exhausting, questioning is lonely, and uncertainty is terrifying. So we find our idols, adopt their certainties, and mistake this submission for wisdom. But what happens to a human being who stops thinking? What happens to a society where millions have outsourced their consciousness to algorithms, authorities, and ideologies? And more urgently, what happens to you when the voice in your head isn't actually yours? These are not abstract questions. This is the crisis of our time, hiding in plain sight, disguised as enlightenment, while delivering enslavement. And until you understand the mechanisms that have captured your mind, until you see the invisible chains that bind your thoughts, you cannot begin to break free. The journey ahead demands something rare: the courage to doubt yourself, the humility to admit you might be wrong, and the strength to stand alone if necessary. Because what we're about to uncover won't offer comfort. It will disturb you, challenge you, perhaps even anger you, but it might also save you. To understand why your mind isn't entirely your own, we must descend into the architecture of human psychology, into those dark chambers where fear, desire, and identity converge to create the perfect conditions for intellectual surrender. The human brain, for all its magnificent complexity, harbors a fatal flaw. It craves certainty in an uncertain world. This craving is so powerful, so deeply embedded in our evolutionary wiring, that we will abandon truth itself to satisfy it. We would rather be confidently wrong than uncomfortably uncertain. This is not a moral failing, it is a feature of our biology, a survival mechanism that once kept our ancestors alive, but now keeps us intellectually imprisoned. CarlJung understood this better than most. He spoke of the shadow, those aspects of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the doubts we suppress, the fears we deny. When we cannot face our own uncertainty, our own ignorance, we project our need for strength and certainty outward. We create idols to carry what we cannot bear to carry ourselves. The charismatic leader who seems to have all the answers. The ideology that explains everything with satisfying simplicity. The influencer whose curated life promises that certainty is possible if you just follow their path. This is the hidden mechanism. We worship idols not because they are true, but because they are certain. And in a world of overwhelming complexity, certainty feels like salvation. But here's what they don't tell you about certainty. It is the enemy of growth, the death of curiosity, the prison of the mind. The moment you become certain, you stop seeking, you stop questioning, you stop evolving. You become fossilized in your beliefs, calcified in your worldview, and from that moment forward, you are no longer living, you are merely defending. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this tragedy unfolding in his own time. He watched as people, terrified by the death of old certainties, rushed to create new idols to worship. God is dead, he declared, not as celebration but as warning. He knew that humanity, unable to bear the weight of its own freedom, would simply replace one master with another. And he was right. We traded religious dogma for political ideology, spiritual authority for scientific materialism, ancient prophets for modern gurus. The faces changed, but the pattern remained. Bow, believe, obey. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer revealed another layer of this trap. He argued that most people live not by reason but by will, a blind, unconscious drive that seeks only satisfaction, comfort, survival. This will does not care about truth. It cares about reducing suffering, about finding security, about maintaining the illusion of control. So we construct our beliefs, not through careful reasoning, but through psychological necessity. We believe what we need to believe to feel safe. Think about your own convictions for a moment. How many of them were chosen through rigorous examination, and how many simply feel true because they protect you from uncomfortable realities? How many of your beliefs exist not because they are correct, but because abandoning them would unravel the story you tell yourself about who you are? This is the terror that Jean-Paul Sartre confronted in his philosophy of radical freedom. He understood that we are, in his words, condemned to be free, burdened with the awful responsibility of creating our own meaning, our own values, our own identity. This freedom is so overwhelming that most people flee from it. They embrace what Sartre called bad faith, the act of deceiving ourselves into believing we have no choice, that our beliefs were given to us by God, nature, society, or circumstance. This self-deception is comfortable. It absolves us of responsibility, but it also robs us of our humanity. And here lies the deepest layer of the problem. Ignorance and idolatry are not imposed upon us. We choose them. We choose them because thinking is painful, because questioning threatens our identity, because standing alone in uncertainty requires a courage most people cannot sustain. So we hand over our minds willingly, gratefully even, to whoever promises to carry the burden for us. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi death camps, discovered something profound about human nature in that hell. He observed that even in the most extreme circumstances, humans need meaning more than they need comfort. But meaning requires effort. It requires confronting reality, accepting suffering, and choosing how to respond. Most people, Frankl realized, would rather adopt someone else's meaning than do the hard work of creating their own. They would rather follow than lead, believe than question, surrender than struggle. This is why ignorance persists in an age of information. This is why idolatry thrives in an age of skepticism. Because the alternative thinking for yourself, bearing the weight of your own freedom, living without the comfort of certainty, is simply too demanding for most people to sustain. But the cost of this surrender is higher than you imagine. When you stop thinking critically, you don't just lose intellectual clarity, you lose yourself. Your personality becomes a collection of borrowed opinions. Your life becomes a performance of someone else's script. Your soul becomes an echo chamber where other people's voices drown out your own. And the truly terrifying part? You won't even notice it happening, because ignorance disguises itself as wisdom, and idolatry disguises itself as devotion. You'll believe you're thinking while merely repeating. You'll believe you're free while wearing invisible chains. You'll believe you're alive while slowly dying inside. This is the hidden problem. This is why critical thinking is dying, not because it's being taken from us, but because we're giving it away one comfortable certainty at a time, one unquestioned belief at a time, one worshipped idol at a time. And until you see this mechanism operating in your own mind, you cannot begin to resist it. You might think that surrendering critical thinking is a private matter, a personal choice with personal consequences. But this is precisely the illusion that allows the problem to metastasize. The death of critical thinking in your mind doesn't stay contained. It radiates outward, shaping your relationships, your society, and ultimately, the trajectory of human civilization itself. Let's start with what happens to you, individually, when you stop thinking critically. Your brain, that magnificent organ capable of abstract reasoning and complex analysis, begins to atrophy in specific ways. Neuroscience reveals that our brains are plastic. They physically reshape themselves based on how we use them. When you repeatedly consume information without analyzing it, when you accept conclusions without examining premises, when you react emotionally rather than respond rationally, you are literally rewiring your neural pathways toward passivity. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for critical thinking, planning, and impulse control, weakens with disuse. Meanwhile, the amygdala, the brain's fear and emotional response center, becomes hyperactive. You become easier to manipulate through emotion, harder to reach through reason. This is not metaphorical. This is measurable, observable brain change. You are becoming neurologically a different person, a more reactive person, a more controllable person. But the consequences extend far beyond neurology. Consider the psychological fragmentation that occurs when you live unexamined. The psychologist Leon Festinger identified cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort we experience when holding contradictory beliefs. When you don't think critically, you inevitably accumulate these contradictions. You believe in freedom while supporting authoritarian measures. You claim to value truth while sharing misinformation. You advocate for compassion while participating in mob outrage. These contradictions create a constant, low-level psychological stress that you might not even recognize, but that manifests as anxiety, irritability, and a vague sense that something is fundamentally wrong. To cope with this dissonance, you develop defense mechanisms. Rationalization becomes your refuge. You create elaborate justifications for your contradictions rather than resolving them. Projection becomes your weapon. You accuse others of the very sins you cannot acknowledge in yourself. Confirmation bias becomes your prison. You seek only information that validates your existing beliefs, creating an increasingly distorted view of reality. Each defense mechanism feels protective in the moment, but collectively they construct a fortress of delusion around your mind. And here's where it becomes truly insidious. You won't recognize what's happening. One of the cruelest ironies of intellectual decay is that it blinds you to itself. The less critically you think, the more confident you become in your thinking. The Dunning-Kruger effect reveals this paradox: incompetence breeds confidence because you lack the very skills needed to recognize your incompetence. You feel certain, informed, even enlightened, while simultaneously becoming more ignorant, more manipulated, more enslaved. Now expand this to the social level. When millions of people simultaneously surrender critical thinking, society doesn't just change, it transforms into something unrecognizable. History offers us chilling examples. Hannah Arendt, studying the rise of totalitarianism, identified what she called the banality of evil. She discovered that the greatest atrocities were not committed by monsters, but by ordinary people who simply stopped thinking. They followed orders. They repeated slogans. They worshiped leaders. They never paused to ask whether what they were doing was right. They only asked whether they were doing it correctly. This is the unseen consequence that should terrify you most. The death of critical thinking makes evil ordinary, makes tyranny inevitable, makes atrocity possible, not through active malice, but through passive thoughtlessness. Consider how this manifests in modern society. Political discourse devolves into tribal warfare, where the goal is not understanding but victory. Complex issues are reduced to simplistic binaries. You're either with us or against us, enlightened or ignorant, saved or damned. Nuance dies. Complexity is seen as weakness, the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, to acknowledge uncertainty, to change one's mind. These once valued intellectual virtues become liabilities in a culture that demands certainty and punishes doubt. The media ecosystem accelerates this decay. Algorithms don't prioritize truth, they prioritize engagement. And what engages? Outrage, fear, tribalism, confirmation of existing beliefs. The result is an information environment that actively punishes critical thinking. If you pause to analyze, to question, to seek multiple sources, you fall behind the conversation. If you express uncertainty or complexity, you're ignored in favor of those who offer simple, emotionally satisfying answers. Social relationships fracture along ideological lines. Families split over political differences, not because the differences are irreconcilable, but because neither side possesses the critical thinking skills to engage productively with disagreement. Friendships dissolve when one person questions a shared belief, because the friendship was never built on genuine connection, but on ideological conformity. Love itself becomes conditional. Conditional on agreement, on shared idols, on mutual participation in the same comfortable illusions. Meanwhile, power consolidates. Whether in government, corporations, or cultural institutions, those in positions of authority benefit immensely from a population that doesn't think critically. Laws pass with minimal scrutiny. Policies are implemented based on emotional appeals rather than evidence. Resources are allocated not according to need or reason, but according to which group can generate the most compelling narrative, the most viral outrage, the most passionate devotion to their particular idol, and perhaps most tragically, human potential withers. How many discoveries remain undiscovered because the minds capable of making them never learn to think critically? How many problems remain unsolved because we're too busy fighting over tribal identities to collaborate on solutions? How many lives are lived in quiet desperation, people sensing something is wrong but lacking the intellectual tools to identify or address it? This is what's at stake. This is the price we pay individually and collectively when critical thinking dies. Not a sudden catastrophe, but a slow suffocation. Not dramatic oppression, but comfortable slavery. Not the death of the body, but the death of everything that makes us fully human. And it's happening right now, in real time, perhaps even in your own mind as you read these words. The question is, will you notice? Will you care? And most importantly, will you resist? Now comes the moment of transformation. You've seen the trap. You've understood the mechanisms. You've confronted the consequences. But awareness without action is just another comfortable prison, a slightly more sophisticated form of the same paralysis. The question that matters now is this: how do you actually break free? How do you reclaim a mind that may not have been truly yours for years, perhaps decades? The answer begins with a single, radical act. You must learn to doubt yourself as fiercely as you doubt others. This is not the doubt of cynicism or nihilism. This is the doubt of intellectual honesty, the willingness to turn your critical eye inward, to interrogate your own beliefs with the same rigor you apply to those you disagree with. Socrates called this the examined life, and he declared it the only life worth living. But here's what most people miss. Self-examination is not comfortable contemplation. It's surgical. It's painful. It requires cutting into your own assumptions, exposing the infected tissue of unexamined beliefs, and enduring the agony of not knowing what will remain when the operation is complete. Start with this practice. For every belief you hold strongly, ask yourself 3 questions. First, where did this belief come from? Not where you think it came from, but where it actually originated. Did you reason your way to it through careful analysis? Or did you absorb it from your environment? Was it taught to you by someone you trusted? Did it arrive through repetition rather than reflection? Be brutally honest. Most of your beliefs, if you trace them back far enough, were adopted rather than chosen. Second, what would change my mind about this? If you cannot answer this question, if no amount of evidence or reasoning could alter your position, then you don't hold a belief, you hold an idol. True beliefs are falsifiable. They exist in relationship with reality and must be willing to yield to it. But idols demand absolute devotion regardless of evidence. They are impervious to reason because they were never based on reason to begin with. Third, who benefits from me believing this? This question cuts to the heart of manipulation. Every belief you hold serves someone's interests. Sometimes that someone is you. The belief protects your ego, your identity, your sense of security. Sometimes it's others, politicians who want your vote, corporations who want your money, movements that want your allegiance. Understanding whose interests your beliefs serve doesn't automatically make them wrong, but it does strip away the illusion that they're purely objective truths you've discovered independently. But intellectual practices alone are insufficient. You must also cultivate what the existentialists called authentic anxiety, the productive discomfort that comes from confronting your own freedom. Kierkegaard understood that anxiety is not something to be eliminated, but something to be embraced, because it signals that you're standing at the edge of genuine choice, genuine responsibility, genuine existence. When you feel anxious about a belief, don't reach for comfort or certainty. Sit with that anxiety. Let it teach you. Here's a counterintuitive truth. The people most certain about their beliefs are often the least free. Certainty is the mind's defense mechanism against the terror of responsibility. If you're absolutely certain, you don't have to keep questioning. You don't have to keep learning. You don't have to keep growing. You can simply be right, forever, and let that rightness define you. But this certainty is a form of death, intellectual, emotional, spiritual death. Consider the example of Galileo, who faced the Inquisition for daring to question the Church's astronomical certainty. He had every reason to recant, to bow to the idol of authority, to protect himself by surrendering his mind. But he understood something profound. To betray your own reasoning is to betray yourself at the deepest level. He chose intellectual integrity over physical safety, and in doing so, helped liberate humanity from centuries of enforced ignorance. You must also practice what philosopher John Stuart Mill called mental liberty, actively exposing yourself to views you find repugnant, not to adopt them, but to test your own. Mill argued that if you only know your own side of an argument, you don't even know that. True understanding requires engaging with the strongest possible version of opposing views, not the weakest strawman your tribe constructs for easy demolition. This is excruciating work. It means reading authors you disagree with, listening to speakers who challenge your worldview, entering spaces where your beliefs are the minority. It means risking the discovery that you might be wrong. And here's the ultimate rebellion, the act that most threatens the systems of ignorance and idolatry. Create rather than consume. Every moment you spend passively consuming content, scrolling, watching, absorbing, is a moment spent letting others shape your thoughts. But when you create, when you write, paint, build, compose, design, you must think. You must make choices. You must encounter the resistance of reality and adjust your understanding accordingly. Creation demands agency. It requires that you exist as a thinking, choosing, responsible being rather than a passive recipient of others' thoughts. This is why authoritarian systems always target artists, writers, and intellectuals first. Not because they're dangerous in themselves, but because they practice and model the very thing totalitarianism cannot tolerate. Independent thought made manifest. The path of intellectual freedom is not a destination, but a practice daily, deliberate, demanding. It requires building what the Stoics called inner citadel, a fortress of rationality within your own mind that no external force can breach. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome, practiced this daily through his meditations, constantly questioning his own perceptions, motivations, and beliefs. If an emperor can find time for rigorous self-examination, what excuse do you have? But understand this: choosing intellectual freedom will cost you. It will cost you the comfort of certainty. It will cost you some relationships with people who need you to believe what they believe. It will cost you the ease of belonging to tribes that demand ideological purity. You will stand alone sometimes. You will be misunderstood. You will be attacked by both sides of every debate for refusing to pledge absolute loyalty to either. Yet this is the price of being fully human. This is what it costs to think. And if you're not willing to pay it, then you're not ready for freedom. You're only ready for a more sophisticated form of slavery. We've arrived at the deepest layer, the revelation that everything before this moment has been preparing you to receive. What I'm about to share is not simply another insight to add to your collection of ideas. It is a fundamental reordering of reality itself, a truth so profound that once you truly grasp it, you cannot return to who you were before. Here it is. Critical thinking is not a tool you possess, it is the essence of your existence itself. Let that settle into your consciousness for a moment. You've been taught to view critical thinking as a skill, something useful for analyzing arguments or making decisions. But this framing is a catastrophic reduction of what thinking actually is. When René Descartes uttered his famous declaration, "I think, therefore I am," he wasn't making a philosophical observation. He was revealing the ontological foundation of human existence. Your capacity to think is not something you have, it is what you are. This means that when you surrender critical thinking, you are not simply losing a useful ability. You are committing a form of existential suicide. You are choosing non-existence while your body continues to breathe. You become what the existentialists called the living dead biological organisms, going through the motions of life without the consciousness that makes life meaningful. Consider what happens when you stop thinking critically. You still make choices, but they're not really your choices. They're programmed responses based on conditioning, fear, and the influence of whatever idols you've bowed to. You still have experiences, but you're not truly present for them. You're filtering everything through pre-approved narratives that tell you what to think before you've actually thought. You still speak, but the words coming from your mouth are not expressions of genuine understanding. They're performances, scripts you've memorized, echoes of voices that aren't your own. In this state, who are you? What is the you that remains when independent thought has been extinguished? The answer is terrifying. Nothing remains. You have become a vessel, a container for other people's ideas, a puppet animated by external forces while maintaining the illusion of autonomous existence. But here's where the revelation deepens into something even more powerful. The moment you begin to think critically again, you are not recovering something you lost, you are creating yourself anew. This is the truth that philosophy has been circling around for millennia. You are not a fixed entity that occasionally engages in thinking. You are an ongoing process of self-creation through thought. Every time you question, analyze, doubt, and reason, you are actively constructing your identity. Your selfhood is not given to you at birth or by society or by any external authority. It emerges, moment by moment, through the exercise of critical consciousness. This is why ignorance and idolatry are not merely intellectual problems, they are existential crises. When you worship an idol, whether it's a person, ideology, or system, you are essentially saying, "I delegate my existence to this external thing. I will let it define me, direct me, determine what I think and who I am." You are abdicating the fundamental responsibility of being human, the responsibility to create yourself through conscious choice. The philosopher Martin Heidegger spent his life exploring what he called authentic existence, the difference between merely existing as an object in the world and truly being as a conscious, choosing entity. He argued that most people live in what he called das Man, the they, a mode of existence where you do what they do, think what they think, want what they want. You disappear into the crowd, into conformity, into the comfortable numbness of letting others define reality for you. But authentic existence, Heidegger insisted, requires confronting what he called being toward death, the recognition that your existence is finite, that every moment you waste in unconscious conformity is a moment of your irreplaceable life that you'll never get back. This confrontation is terrifying, but it's also liberating. When you truly grasp your own mortality, the opinions of the crowd suddenly matter less. The idols lose their power. What matters is how you use the brief time you have to exist consciously, authentically, freely. This brings us to the ultimate paradox, the final truth that will either liberate or devastate you. You have always been free. You have always had the power to think critically. Every moment you spent in intellectual bondage was a moment you chose, consciously or unconsciously, not to exercise that freedom. This is not meant to induce guilt, but to reveal possibility. If your imprisonment was chosen, then your liberation can also be chosen right now, this moment. Not tomorrow when you have more time, not next week when life is less busy, not someday when you finally feel ready. Now. The choice is devastatingly simple. Will you think, or will you be thought? Will you create yourself through conscious reasoning, or will you let yourself be created by forces you never examine? Will you live as a human being, that remarkable creature capable of abstract thought, moral reasoning, and genuine choice? Or will you exist as something less, a sophisticated animal driven by conditioning and fear? Here's what makes this choice so profound. No one can make it for you. Not this video, not any book, not any teacher or guru or leader. This is the one choice that is absolutely, irreducibly yours. You can delegate every other decision in your life, but you cannot delegate the decision to think. Either you do it, or it doesn't happen. Your mind is the one territory where you are sovereign if you choose to claim that sovereignty. And here's the beautiful, terrifying truth that completes this revelation. Every moment you choose to think critically, you are performing an act of rebellion against every force that seeks to control you. The algorithm that wants to keep you scrolling. The ideology that wants your unquestioning loyalty. The leader who wants your worship. The system that wants your compliance. The comfortable lie that wants to replace uncomfortable truth. When you think, truly think, you become ungovernable. Not because you reject all authority or refuse all cooperation, but because you've claimed the authority of your own consciousness. You evaluate rather than simply accept. You question rather than simply obey. You create your own meaning rather than simply consuming the meaning others provide. This is the ultimate truth, the final revelation. Critical thinking is not something you do, it is how you choose to be. And that choice, renewed moment by moment, thought by thought, question by question, is the most powerful act of freedom available to any human being. So I ask you now, at the end of this journey, who will you choose to be? Will you return to comfortable unconsciousness, to the warm embrace of certainty, and the easy devotion to idols? Or will you accept the burden and gift of your own consciousness, the responsibility and freedom of thinking for yourself? The answer to that question will determine not just what you believe, but who you are. Not just what you know, but how fully you exist. Not just what life you live, but whether you truly live at all. The death of critical thinking is not inevitable. It ends the moment you decide to think again. And that decision, that choice to reclaim your mind, your freedom, your very existence, is available to you right now. Will you take it? Remember, to think is to resist. To think is to live. To think is to be free. The choice has always been yours. It remains yours now, and it will be yours with every breath you take, every word you speak, every belief you examine or accept. Choose wisely, choose consciously, choose to think, because in the end, your humanity depends on it.